I just finished my coffee and looked at my watch. It had been a very long day, and I was looking forward to its end. I spent 3 hours testifying and answering questions before being put in this tiny room with only a television monitor and my own thoughts to ease the wait. I was told to wait here until further notice, but that was already over 2 hours ago. Surely, I thought, the commission should have already come to some conclusion. Suddenly, the door opened and my legal representative, Commander Tom Baker, entered the room. "The committee has just concluded its meeting for the day, Lieutenant Jones," he said. "It's me, by the way. William Jones, to friends and family Bill. I am a first lieutenant airman in the United States Space Force, what used to be called the Space Force, formed almost 80 years ago. They want to see you tomorrow at 08 Ezo, so you better get back to your quarters," Commander Baker said. "And remember, do not communicate with other witnesses in the case, especially with your wife." "You mean the cheater known as my soon-to-be ex-wife, don't you, sir?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes, her," he said. "Come on, Lieutenant, get out of here, and stay out of trouble." "Yes, sir," I said, standing up. I stretched my legs, took my cap, and walked out the door. I got into my tiny electric car and headed back to the book. This is the barracks for single officers, for those not familiar with the term. When I got to my room, I took off my uniform, grabbed a frozen faux meat hamburger, and threw it in the microwave. While it was cooking, I took the beer out of the refrigerator and opened it. When my burger was ready, I took it out and ate it in 3 large bites, trying to ignore the taste. They were nothing for a hike or a quick snack, but were a weak approximation of real meat, which became harder and harder to come by. I sat down in a chair and turned on the TV to watch the latest news. There was nothing there that caught my attention, so I sat back and began to remember the events of the past weeks. Until recently, I was the weapons officer on the USS Armstrong, the Corps' newest, largest, fastest, and most advanced starship. Named after the astronaut who first walked on the moon in 1969, Armstrong was considered the most advanced piece of machinery ever made by man. The crew consisted of 110 officers and crew members, and the ship was propelled by 2 plasma ion fusion propulsion systems. It was said that Armstrong could reach Jupiter in less than 50 days. In addition, Armstrong carried enough firepower to destroy any threat. In addition to a suite of nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, it was equipped with 3 pulse energy weapons, a railgun, and several short-range mini-lasers, operating similar to the miniguns of the early 21st century. All in all, it was a serious ship, and my hand controlled all these weapons. Why all this firepower is needed, you may ask. About 45 years ago, one of our shuttles was attacked by an Iranian spacecraft. Unfortunately, the shuttle was unarmed and had no protection. A missile fired by the Iranians struck the shuttle from below and destroyed it. Space, being the most hostile environment known to man, left no chance of survival for anyone. We almost went to war over this incident, but the diplomats somehow managed to avoid it. However, the Space Corps decided from that moment on that every manned spacecraft in its fleet would be armored and equipped for combat. Receiving orders to serve on the Armstrong on its maiden voyage to Jupiter was made even sweeter by the fact that my wife of 5 years, Tabitha, or Tubby as she liked to be called, was also ordered to serve on that ship. Unlike me, she was supposed to be the ship's chief pilot. At first I was excited that we would be able to serve together on the newest ship in the fleet. This was the first time we were destined to serve on the same ship at the same time. We had been sweethearts since high school and vowed to be faithful to each other shortly after our 18th birthday. We both wanted to fly in space and applied to the academy in our last year of school. Both were accepted and engaged immediately after graduation, with plans to marry after graduating from the academy. She fulfilled her dream and became a pilot. I couldn't become a pilot and was assigned to the operations and weapons department. I was disappointed at first, but the more I shot and blasted, the more I liked it. After graduating from the academy, we got married, both in our dress uniforms. We were assigned to the same base, but unfortunately our missions often kept us apart. It's already hard for one spouse to constantly go into space for 2 months or more, but it's even worse when both do the same. Sometimes she would go on a mission for 2 months, leaving me to wait at home. Other times I was the one going on a mission. There were times when we were both on missions at the same time, but on different ships. Naturally, we had little time for each other, so we tried to make the most of the time we had. Don't get me wrong, I didn't sit at home idly while she was in space. I became interested in a relatively new form of martial arts called grav-tac, which was designed specifically for use in low to medium gravity environments. I did martial arts in school and was immediately hooked on it. It required strength, tactical thinking, and a deep knowledge of how things react in low gravity. At this time, I didn't even think that Tabby could cheat on me. I always trusted her and was confident that she would do the right thing, so I never worried about it. Even though I was sometimes tempted to, I decided that I would never cheat on the woman I love. So the thought that she might be seeing someone behind my back never even crossed my mind. I remembered the times when we fantasized about making love in zero gravity on the moon or Mars. We always said that if such an opportunity presents itself, we will try at least once. So naturally, when we both received orders to serve on Armstrong, it was like a dream come true for both of us. Unfortunately, this dream turned into a nightmare with no way out. My thoughts rushed to the day of my departure. Dressed in a full space suit and carrying a landing bag, I remained silent as technicians secured me in the seat of the passenger shuttle that would take me and 20 others to the orbital dock where Armstrong was located. As the senior pilot, Tubby had boarded the first shuttle, which had launched just over 3 hours earlier. I was on the third shuttle that was launched that day. 3 more were to follow. Next to me was Armstrong's first officer, Commander Jason Travers, or Bull, as he was called because of his size and general demeanor. I knew Bull from the academy. He was an instructor there when Tubby and I were studying, and he was tough then, not tolerating the slightest disobedience. He expected 110% from students and would not accept anything less. He was also Tubby's handler at the time. I took a few of his classes, but other than that we had little contact comrade. "So, Jones, happy to serve with your wife?" asked the Bull. "Yes, sir, I'm glad," I replied. "Well, this will be one of those flights that will go down in history," he said. "I heard we're going further than anyone before us," I told him. "Jupiter and back in less than 100 days, he replied. "This will be a very interesting mission." I felt and heard the pumps of the rocket below us that would lift us into the sky, and I knew that we would soon leave the Earth. Bull knew it too, as did everyone else on the shuttle. We were all veterans of spaceflight, so this was not new to us. Bull looked around to make sure everyone was ready. "Okay, people, say goodbye to the Earth. This is it, so get yourself in hand," he said loudly before laying his head on the chair cushion. We closed the visor and prepared for launch. We felt the vehicle shake as the engines fired and felt enormous G-forces as the rocket began to rise. Looking out the window, I saw the clouds quickly rush past as we rose into the sky. Soon the blue sky turned to black, and I could see the curvature of the planet below us. I never got tired of this view. The shuttle shook as the boosters undocked. I knew they would fall back to Earth and land near the launch site so they could be used again. About an hour later, I noticed a structure in the distance. "Here she is," said the Bull, opening his visor. "We'll be docking soon." Half an hour later, the shuttle arrived at a large open docking station and matched its speed to the docks. 2 large tubular structures moved out and touched the shuttle. I heard the hiss of air as the pressure stabilized at the dock. "This is it," said Bull. "Prepare to feel a slight gravitational field. There should be 08 G in the ship right now." I knew from my orientation documents that the Armstrong was equipped with a gravity system that could be adjusted as needed. This helped mitigate the effects of prolonged exposure to weightlessness, such as fluid shifts, muscle atrophy, and bone loss. We waited for a signal from the crew, and soon the green light came on above the hatches. Bull unbuckled his belt and stood up, beckoning for the others to follow him. After he entered the aisle, I unbuckled my belt and stood up, picking up my bag. The transition from the nearly zero gravity of the shuttle to the slightly reduced, but still present gravity of the ship was strange. Within a few steps, I felt the weight of my backpack and bag. "Launch positions in 4 hours, people," Bull said loudly as we entered the ship. "Let's go. There are 3 more shuttles behind us." I already knew from the orientation documents where our cabin was, so I headed there first, hoping to see Tubby. Unfortunately, she wasn't there, but I could tell she was already in the cabin since her things took up half the space in our small closet. I put away my equipment, took off my heavy pressure suit, and put on my regular flight suit. Taking my black uniform cap, I headed to the bridge to the weapons console. I had a lot of work to do before launching. When I got there, the bridge was buzzing with activity. Tabby was doing pre-flight checks, so I left her alone. I launched the console and began calibration procedures, then took a printout of the weapons inventory. After that, I went to the 2 cruise missile platforms and physically checked the serial numbers on the sheet and made sure the locks were in place. I then walked to each weapon station and made sure they were locked and ready for immediate use. Then I returned to the bridge to report to the captain. I had to wait for the medical professional to finish his report before submitting his inventory, but that was fine with me. When the doctor left, the captain looked at me. I recognized him at once, Captain Alan Simmons. "Lieutenant Jones," he said, taking my inventory sheet. "We served on Shepherd, as I remember." "Yes, sir, we did," I replied. He signed the inventory, and we checked our key numbers. Only 3 people had the keys to the cruise missiles, me, the captain, and the first officer. 2 of these 3 keys were required to launch the rockets. "It's good to have you with us, Jones," Alan said. "I heard that you and our chief pilot are married." Tabby turned and smiled when she heard this. "Yes, sir, it is," I told him. "Okay," Alan said. "This should make the journey more interesting for you." "Yes, sir, I hope so," I replied, looking at Tubby. She gave me a sly smile and went back to her business. By that time, Bull had already reached the bridge and was inspecting everyone to make sure that everything was in place. Bull looked at me with a look that could freeze a solar flare, and I realized that this was a hint to return to my console. "I better get back to my station, sir." Alan nodded and turned his attention to the next person demanding his attention. I returned to my station and made sure all calibration tasks were completed. From my point of view, everything was locked and in good order. I knew from my time on Shepherd that Captain Simmons liked to conduct surprise weapons and marksmanship training, so it was important to be ready to fight at a moment's notice. It was also important that the guidance system remained calibrated at all times. In general, once calibrated, the system remained that way unless a major malfunction occurred or someone intervened. However, each shift began with a calibration check. Finally, Alan began his pre-flight check of each station as we were all strapped into our seats. "Operations," he called. "All systems are ready to go," replied Lieutenant Commander Alice Brewster, the operations officer and my immediate superior. "Engineering," Alan called. "All systems are normal and within normal parameters." "Ready to launch, sir," responded Lieutenant Commander Brian Faulkner, senior engineer. "Armament." "All systems are calibrated and locked, sir." "All weapons are in place," I said. "Connection." "Comms are good, sir," said LT. Commander Denise Simpson, senior communications officer. "Navigation." "Course set and locked, sir." "ETA Mars station is 440 hours, said LT. Ryan Holcomb, senior navigation officer, whose console was next to Tubby's console at the front of the bridge. First officer. "All crew members are in place and ready, sir. All stations are reporting readiness for launch," Bull said from his station located directly behind Alan and slightly to the left. Alan nodded and pressed a button on the console in front of him. "Houston, this is Armstrong speaking. Requesting permission to launch." "Launch clearance confirmed, Armstrong." "Good luck," said a voice from the communications speaker overhead. Alan nodded and pressed the button on the console again. "Acknowledged, Houston," he said. He pressed another button and spoke again. Cosmodoc, says Armstrong. Permission to launch has been received. Join and remove all lines. Acknowledged, Armstrong. Lines cleared. We heard several sharp sounds and knew that it was the connecting lines being removed. From that moment on, we were on our own food. A few moments later, we received confirmation that all lines had been completely cleared and the ship was free to move. Start the engines, Alan ordered. The engines are running, Brian said. Take us out, helmsman. Be careful. Don't scratch the paint, Alan said with a smile. Yes, sir, Tubby said, moving 2 levers forward, holding the steering column. The ship slowly began to move forward, and I saw the exit from the space dock approaching. I knew that at this stage we were working only on shunting engines. Turning on the plasma ion fusion engines inside the space dock would cause serious damage to both the dock and Armstrong. We soon emerged from the huge structure. The space dock has been cleared, Tabby said. From here, we would enter Earth's orbit in a spiral to a point somewhere between the Earth and the Moon, where we would fire 2 large engines. Q-Spot, it was called, and I could see the tracking on the navigation console from where I was sitting. An hour later, the navigator spoke. Time remaining until Q-Point is 2 minutes, sir, Ryan said. The road is clear. This meant that the forward sensors detected no debris or organic material, such as rock, in our path that could damage the ship. Acknowledged, Alan said. Engineering. Engines are warm and ready, sir, Brian said. Alan pressed a button on his console. Houston, this is Armstrong speaking. We're approaching the Q-Point. Approaching the Q-Point, accepted, Armstrong. We all watched the countdown on our consoles and prepared ourselves. When the timer reaches 0, Alan spoke again. Check the tires and light the fire, helmsman. Let's see what this girl can do. Tabby's hands flew over her console as she answered. Checking the tires and lighting the fire. Yes, sir, she said. She moved the control levers fully forward, and we all felt the initial force as the plasma ion fusion engines opened. We heard a faint hum as the engines began to rev up and felt the G-forces increase. I knew that at that moment we were flying through space faster than any human had ever flown before. I looked at Tabby, feeling a great sense of pride at her handling of this giant vessel. She looked back at me and I smiled, winked, and gave her a thumbs up. She smiled back. I looked at Bull and thought he was about to explode, so I went back to my console. About an hour later, I got my first hint that this trip wasn't going to go smoothly when Bull posted the bridge officer's duty schedule. I wasn't surprised that he posted the schedule that was usually the first officer's job. But I was surprised that I was put on the second shift. Understand that in space, there is no concept of day or night. Our chronometers, like all others on core ships, are synchronized with the chronometers in Houston. When it's night in Houston, the lights on the ship are dimmed significantly so the crew can feel like it's night. This usually happens during the second shift. Bridge officers in the Corps typically work 12-hour shifts. As a result, there are 2 shifts, first and second. The Corps has a long tradition of placing senior bridge officers on the first shift and less experienced and inferior officers on the second shift. There is nothing in writing that explains this, and the first officer has considerable freedom in this regard. But it still hurt to see that Bull put me on the second shift. It was almost like a demotion. What made it even worse was that it meant that Tubby and I wouldn't be able to spend much time together since she was on the first shift. If we're lucky, we'll be able to see each other for a few minutes during a shift change. To say that I was furious is an understatement, and Bull knew it. Are there any problems with the schedule, Lieutenant? I heard the Bull's question. I looked up and saw him in front of my console. By then Alice had approached me. Apparently she had seen the chart too and was just as interested in the explanation as I was. Am I still the Chief Weapons Officer, sir? I asked. Of course, said the Bull. Then why am I on the second shift? Because in my opinion, this is the best place for you, he said, his voice commanding attention. Listen, Lieutenant, if you have problems with the schedule, contact the captain. Through me. By then Alan had walked over to my console. Any problems, gentlemen? He asked. Lieutenant Jones doesn't seem to like the bridge duty schedule, sir, Bull said. Allen looked at the chart, frowning. I understand why he might feel that way, First Officer, Allen said. This is quite unusual, isn't it? Yes, sir, under normal circumstances I would agree, said Bull. But I believe Lt. Jones' experience and knowledge will be best utilized on the second shift, and I believe it will give us an opportunity to train some of the other weapons officers, give them experience on the first shift. My lie detectors were off the charts at this point. I couldn't believe the nonsense he was telling the captain. Is this the only reason, Commander, or is there something else? Allen asked. Apparently, he wasn't buying it either. We can speak frankly, sir, Bull said quietly. Always, First Officer, Allen said. I've never been a big fan of spouses working on the same ship, especially in such close quarters. I don't want them to be distracted from their responsibilities. I thought so, Allen said. I understand why you would think that, but I won't let their morale suffer because of this flight. Make sure they have time for each other, you hear? Yes, sir, said Bull. Allen looked at me before speaking. Can you handle this, Lieutenant? He asked. Yes, sir, I said. He nodded. Okay, carry on, he said as he walked away. Bull looked at me for a moment, then his face broke into a grin. Don't worry, Jones. I'll look after your wife, he said as he left. I looked at Alice and was about to say something, but she put her finger to her lips. Don't say anything, Bill, she said. We'll talk later. Go, I'll call Lieutenant Robinson. Yes, ma'am, I said quietly. I glanced at Tubby and noticed that she was trying to concentrate on her console. Her face was red, but I didn't know whether it was from shame or guilt. I turned and walked off the bridge, feeling more humiliated and embarrassed than I had ever felt on the ship. Something was clearly not right about this. I went to the cafeteria, hoping to get something to eat. It was outside of normal meal times, and I knew there wouldn't be much there, but I needed something in my stomach. There's not much to eat right now, Lieutenant, said the man behind the plexiglass partition. We only have fake meat hamburgers. They taste like crap, but they will definitely fill you up. Sorry. It'll do for now, I said. I'll take one. He took one and placed it on my tray. He was holding a small packet of flavored ketchup. Would you like some lube to make it a little more edible? He asked with a smile. Why not? I said, taking the package. Thank you. You're welcome, Lieutenant, he said. I grabbed a small bottle of chocolate milk and headed towards the empty table. I ate a hamburger, covered the patty in ketchup, and drank milk. This guy was right. The burger tasted like crap, but filled me up, and the ketchup made it a little more edible. I put the tray away, threw the trash in the trash can, and headed to my cabin. I lay down in my bed and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I thought about what Bull was really up to. And what did he mean when he said he'd look after Tubby? I tossed and turned for about an hour, but could not relax. Irritated, I stood up and put on my workout clothes, a t-shirt and shorts. After putting on a pair of socks and shoes, I headed to the small gym on one of the lower decks. When I got there, I was relieved to see that I was alone. Okay, I thought. This would give me space to vent my frustrations without having to interact with anyone, which I didn't think I could do without getting angry. I warmed up a bit, then worked on the treadmill and weight machine for a while. I then went to the gravity controller mounted on the wall and reduced the gravity in the room to 0.4 g. I instantly felt the difference. I then spent the next half hour doing some of the grav-tac exercises I had learned before leaving Earth. By that time, I was already sweating a lot and felt that I could finally fall asleep. I returned gravity to its previous level, then returned to my cabin. I showered in the small bathroom, set the alarm, then went back to bed. I fell asleep instantly. When the alarm went off, I got up, showered, shaved, put on my uniform, and headed to the cafeteria to eat something, which was much better than the fake meat burger I had eaten earlier. I got to the bridge just as Tabby was leaving. "Hello, stranger," I said when I saw her. She looked at me and smiled. "Hi," she replied. "Look, I didn't get a chance to tell you, But you did a great job launching, I said. Thank you, she replied. Well, look, how about I come over to your place on lunch break so we can spend some time together, I asked. I saw the wheels turning in her head and thought she was going to come up with an excuse as to why it wouldn't work. Fortunately, this did not happen. Of course, I'll set an alarm, she said. Maybe you can eat me instead of one of those fake burgers. Fits me, I said. See you in 6 hours. I will, she said, kissing me quickly. I love you. I love you too, I answered her. I watched her walk away and thought maybe we could do this. I turned and faced the bull's furious face. You've finally arrived, Jones, he said. I looked at my watch. My shift officially starts in 15 minutes, Commander, I said. I just wanted to say a few words with my wife before we start. If that doesn't bother you, sir. For a moment, I thought he was going to hit me, but he calmed down. Yes, that's normal, he said, walking down the corridor. I entered the bridge and relieved Lieutenant Robinson. He gave me a shift report and left. Alice approached me as I began the calibration procedures. How are you holding up? She asked. I'm fine, ma'am, I said. Drop that ma'am, Bill, she said. We've worked together before. Seriously, how are you holding up? It's not easy, but I can handle it, Alice. Thanks for asking. Please. Look, I know you have a lot on your mind, but I think you need to keep an eye on your wife and Commander Travers. I looked at her in shock. Do you think there's something between them? I asked. Perhaps. Call it feminine intuition if you want, Bill. I just feel like there's something going on between them. I've seen it before. Little glances back and forth, something like that. Nothing obvious, but there's definitely something between them. Spark, she said. Got it, Alice. Thanks for telling me. I plan to meet her on my lunch break. Hope that helps, I said. I hope so, Bill, she said. Do you think we should tell the captain? I asked her. She shook her head. Not unless you have solid evidence against them. An allegation of this nature against a senior officer could backfire on you and seriously damage your career, she said. Just pay attention and try to keep your wife on her toes. I'll keep an eye on things during the first shift. Okay, Alice, I said. Thanks for the warning. She nodded and left the bridge. I checked the calibration procedures and went to inventory the crew's missiles and inspect the weapon stations. When I returned, Alan was waiting for me. Do you want to shoot a little? He asked. Damn, I'm always ready to shoot, I thought. Yes, sir, I replied. Okay, he said. Fire some drones and see what you can do. I set the station to launch a series of 5 drones, then activated the short-range mini lasers. They worked very similarly to the old miniguns. A series of 6 powerful and very hot lasers were installed like old Gatling guns. The fire from these lasers was intense and could cut through several inches of armor plate in a matter of seconds. I once saw them cut an old ironclad battleship in half. The old thing's waist armor was over 12 inches thick, but the lasers cut through it like a hot knife through butter. Once the drones were launched, I aimed the mini lasers at them. The system was designed to track and shoot 10 targets simultaneously. It only took a second or two for the lasers to destroy the drones. I looked at my console and saw a message. All targets destroyed. Well done, Lieutenant, Alan said with a smile. Thank you, sir, I replied. He stood up from his chair and walked over to my console. I'm going to take a nap, Lieutenant. Looks like you'll be the senior officer on watch, so take the center chair. I'll be back in time for your lunch break, he said with a knowing smile. Having previously served with Alan, I knew him as the king of the nap. He was one of those people who could work for almost 24 hours with only 3 or 4 hours of sleep. I thought it was something that comes with years of team experience. Yes, sir, thank you, I said in response. He left the bridge and I took over his station. I felt good sitting in the command chair. From here, I could control everything on the ship. That's when it dawned on me. Each crew member wore a device on their wrist that not only showed the time and served as an alarm, but also acted as a communicator, a tracking device, and monitored our vital signs. All crew members were required to wear this device at all times. The only time we were allowed to take it off was when we took a shower. I turned on the tracking monitor on the command console and began looking for Travers. The monitor showed that he was in his apartment. More precisely, the monitor showed that the tracking device was in his apartment. When I checked the data further, I noticed that the device showed that he was in deep sleep and his heart rate was normal for such a state. This could only happen if he was actually wearing the device. I found Jones and was given two choices, William and Tabitha. I selected Tabby and saw that her device was in our apartment. Great. Like Travers, her device showed that she was asleep, and her vital signs were normal for the condition. I thought about checking the movement history of both devices, but knew that this would require a command or medical password. Since I didn't have one, I couldn't tell if they were engaging in other, more vigorous activity. But what I saw was good enough for now, I thought. It would be very difficult for them to falsify such data, so I turned off the tracking monitor and continued with my business. I looked around on the bridge. Everyone was busy at their stations and immersed in their work. It seemed like I wasn't even here. I went back to my console and checked the checklist. So far, everything was working within normal parameters. We were approaching a course correction in about an hour, but I knew it was already programmed into the navigation system and would be performed automatically. The liaison officer on watch was in constant contact with someone from Mission Control in Houston, and I knew that I would not need to intervene unless a situation arose that required the captain's immediate attention. The engineer on duty closely monitored the condition of the ship's engines and vital systems. The helmsman and navigation officer closely monitored the ship's flight to ensure that the upcoming course correction would proceed without problems. I made the necessary log entries for that hour and went to the weapons console for a quick check. Everything seemed fine, so I returned to the center chair and sat down. About 2 hours into his shift, Corporal Marks walked through each station, taking everyone's drink orders. We were allowed to have drinks at our stations as long as they were in closed containers and straws were used. She left and returned from the cafeteria a little later, handing out drinks to everyone. A few minutes before my lunch break, Alan returned, and I handed him the command chair, briefly reporting on the events during his absence. He nodded, sitting down and writing in his journal. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he said. "Why don't you go on your lunch break now?" he added with a slight wink. "Yes, sir," I said as I left my station. I headed to the cabin tubby, and I shared and paused before opening the hatch. I took a deep breath and entered. She just woke up. Her alarm went off. She pulled back the blanket, and I saw her naked body on the bed. God, she's so beautiful, I thought, walking up to her and taking off my flight suit along the way. By the time I approached her, I had already taken off all my clothes. "Are you ready for dinner?" she asked provocatively. I smiled and climbed into bed with her. "You know I do," I said, starting to kiss her. We had sex. "God, it was so good," she said. "I really needed this." "Me too," I told her. "I missed you." "And I missed you. I love you so much." "I love you too," I answered her. "You better get up, wash your face, and go," she said. "You haven't eaten yet." I looked at the time and saw that I had about 40 minutes left until the end of the break. "Yes, you're right," I said. "Would you like to do this again, maybe during your lunch break?" "Sure, why not?" she said with a smile. Feeling a little better, I got out of bed, took a quick shower, and headed to the dining room. Before leaving the cabin, I kissed her, then dimmed the lights and slightly reduced the gravity level in the room to 07G. I knew that it was only because of my knowledge of GravTAC that I was able to perform this, and I knew that Bull was not familiar with it. Keep in mind that sex in space is not easy. Forget what you might have seen in movies. Firstly, blood in microgravity tends to move towards the head, rather than to one place. Luckily, the ship's standard gravity was set at 08G, which barely allowed us to enjoy each other. But it was still not easy. I had no doubt that if gravity had been set lower than it is, we probably wouldn't have been able to do what we did. Another concern is that testosterone levels tend to decrease in microgravity, and over time the heart can shrink in size, reducing the amount of blood in the circulatory system. These were just some of the reasons why NASA was against sending couples into space a century ago. Another reason was complications associated with pregnancy and childbirth. However, there have been many stories of pairs in orbit over the years. I remember reading about an astronaut who spent 14 months on the Russian Mir station in the 1990s. According to the story, he became intimate with a female astronaut, leading some to believe they made love in orbit. Kremlin officials denied these claims, and the cosmonaut later wrote about it. There is no need to say what we dream about. Men think about such things. You can't turn away from them. But these thoughts somehow fade over time, he wrote. He also said his bosses suggested he take a sex doll with him, but he was worried he might get too attached to the busty inflatable toy. Many of the space agency's old restrictions were adopted when the Corps began sending people into space. But the development of artificial gravity at the beginning of 209, the Zeros made many of these restrictions obsolete. Therefore, the Corps relaxed its requirements a little and allowed spouses to have sex in space, provided they use some form of contraception and set the gravity level to 0 Hg. I felt much better as I quickly ate a tuna sandwich and returned to the bridge. When I got there, I still had 2 minutes left before the end of the break. Alan looked at me as I took my station. "Did you have a good lunch, Lieutenant?" he asked. "Yes, sir, very good," I replied. He smiled and nodded. "Okay, continue," he said, returning to his console. The next 17 days were much the same. Tabby did come to our cabin a few times during her lunch break, and of course I joined her during my breaks whenever possible. Being able to see each other at least part of the time helped me cope with this part of the trip. I rarely saw Bull during this time, and that also helped. Of course, I still had some concerns, but I didn't see or hear anything that would indicate anything suspicious. Alice kept me informed, but she also didn't see or hear anything suspicious. By the time we reached Mars Station, I began to think that perhaps I had exaggerated the whole thing. After Armstrong docked at Mars Station, I put on my dress uniform in hopes of a little vacation with Tubby, but my hopes of spending quality time with her at Huygens Base, a domed structure named after the Dutch astronomer who charted Mars using a telescope of his own design, were dashed when Bull informed me that one or more of the weapons posts were having problems. "What?" I asked, shocked. "There were no problems the last time I checked them, which was just a few hours ago during my shift." I looked at Lieutenant Robinson. "Were you aware of any problems?" I asked him. He shook his head. "No, sir, until the very end of the shift," he replied. "There was something clearly suspicious about this, and I decided to look into it." "We've only been here 72 hours, Bull said, "and these weapons need to be operational by the time they launch. So you better get going, Jones." I looked at Tubby and shook my head. "Everything will be fine, dear," she said with a sad expression on her face. "We'll have another chance to visit Huygens together. I'll bring you a souvenir, okay?" The Bull grinned. "Don't worry, Jones. I'll look after your wife. I promise," he said. "Yes, of course, you'll look after it, you bastard," I thought. At that moment, Alan approached. "Well, are you ready for your vacation?" he asked. "We are ready," said the Bull. "But Jones needs to check the weapon systems." "There is a problem?" Alan asked. "Too many lasers calibrations are off, sir," Robinson said. "When did it happen?" Alan asked. "I just noticed it before I finished my shift, sir," Robinson said. Alan frowned and looked at me. "Then you better check, Lieutenant," he said. "I'll watch them with you, if you don't mind." "I don't mind at all, sir," I replied, looking at Bull. "I appreciate it." "I'll stay and help, Lieutenant," Robinson said. "Thank you, Robinson. I appreciate it," I said. "Well, we better get to the station before all the shuttles leave," Bull said. Tabby looked at me sadly, but didn't say anything. "Do it, First Officer," Alan said. Bull and Tubby turned around and left. I couldn't help but notice that she never said she loved me or that she would see me later. I turned and looked at Alice. "It stinks to high heaven, Bill," she said quietly. "I'll keep them in sight there." "Thank you," I said. She smiled and patted my hand before leaving. Well, I better change into my work clothes, I said. Which lasers have problems? Number 2 and number 5, sir, Robinson said. Okay, I'll take number 2 if you check number 5. We'll have to look at them all, I said. I'm on my way, sir, Robinson said. I turned to leave and saw Alan looking at the door through which Bull and Tubby had left. I could see the wheels turning in his head. I'll change and meet you at the second post, if that's okay, sir, I said. Meet me there in a few minutes, he said. I took my tool bag and left the bridge. I had been on guard for a few minutes when Alan crawled towards me. I noticed that he had also changed into his work uniform. What's there? He asked. I'm taking off the cover of the control unit, I said. I took the tool and began to unscrew the cap. After removing the cover, I looked inside and saw the problem. One of the drive gears was broken and broke off. The clip holding it in place was also missing. I looked to see if it was at the bottom of the block, but it wasn't there. He completely disappeared. Damn, I said. What? Alan asked. Someone's been in that block, sir, I said. The clamp was missing and the drive gear was broken and chipped. What would have happened if a weapon had been used? The drive force would completely destroy the system. If the lasers were firing at this time, they could cut through the hull, I said. Damn. What do you think could have led to this? He asked. I shook my head. Someone did this on purpose, I said. I don't see any other way for the clamp to completely disappear. The thing is, these are usually sealed blocks. The only way to get inside is with a special tool. This one, I added, holding the tool in my hand. Can it be fixed? He asked. Of course, I said. We have spare control units in stock. But this is not a part that usually breaks, and we only have 2 spare units. Hopefully the others are intact. How long will it take to fix it? The entire unit needs to be disassembled, a new control unit installed, tested, aligned, and calibrated. About 8 to 10 hours. This is assuming there are no other problems. Damn, he said. Okay, install a new control unit. Do you need my help? Although it was a time-consuming task, it was a one-man job, and I didn't really need his help. However, the fact that he offered to help meant a lot, and I respected him even more. I shook my head. No, sir, I can handle it, but thanks for the offer anyway, I said. Besides, there's only room for one person. At that moment, my wrist communicator beeped. I looked and saw that it was a call from Robinson. Jones on the line. Speak up, Robinson, I said, speaking into the communicator. Boss, it looks like the mounting clamp has broken and the drive gear has completely worn out, he said. I looked at Alan. The entire control unit needs to be replaced. Okay, I said. Get started. Contact the armory and check all weapons platforms. We'll do it, he said. What is the probability that 2 control units will break at the same time? Alan asked. Very small, I said. I've never seen these blocks break like that, especially 2 at the same time. These are probably the most stable platforms in our inventory. Is it possible that this is a manufacturing defect? He asked. Very unlikely, sir, I said. These units are thoroughly tested before installation. I've worked with hundreds of these devices and have never seen anything like it. Fine. I need to report this to Houston, Alan said. We better call the engineers from the Mars station and conduct a full diagnostic of the 5th level. It's hard to believe that a $1 trillion spaceship could be stopped with a 50-cent clamp. I chuckled. Let me know as soon as you're done. Yes, sir, I said. I watched as he climbed out of the cramped space and returned to his work. Once I had the control box completely removed, I took a closer look to see what else I could find. There, inside the case, there was a dark spot. It didn't look like a gear lube. Upon careful examination, I realized what it was: blood. The one who sabotaged this block cut his hand on the body. I took a cotton swab from my toolkit and managed to collect some of the substance. I then put it in a small plastic bag, sealed it, and put it back in the toolbox. I was going to take it to a medical lab for DNA testing. By that time, One of the gunsmiths had brought a new control unit and took away the old one. I went back to my work and tried to concentrate on what I was doing, but it was difficult. I thought about who could have done this and why, and then it dawned on me. Bull did his best to keep Tubby and I apart during this flight. First, he changed the shift schedule. Of course, he offered an explanation. Alan accepted it, but I didn't believe it. Then this happened. And what did he say when he and Tubby left for Huygens? Something about taking care of Tubby? Really? The thought of Tabby cheating on me with him made me both angry and sick. I knew that Bull had been her advisor at the academy, and I also knew that they had served together several times since then. Does this mean that she slept with him then too? I finally finished installing the new control unit and did a dry test. Everything seemed fine, so I made an entry in the maintenance log. 10 hours of my life went down the drain. 10 hours that I will never get back. The 10 hours I had to spend on Huygens with Tubby. I looked through the entire journal when I finished, but I couldn't find anything that would give a clue. I saw Robinson when I emerged from the technical tunnel. "How was it?" I asked him. "The new unit is installed, sir," he said. The gunsmiths checked other stations and reported that there were no more problems. However, I want a complete visual inspection of all equipment and a physical inventory of all weapons and missiles, I said. I know this will disrupt your vacation, but it is necessary. "I understand, sir," he said. "I'll get started right away." "Thank you," I said. He nodded, smiled, and went back to his work. On the way to the bridge, I went into the infirmary and spoke with the paramedic on duty. "What happened, Lieutenant Jones?" asked the petty officer. "Do you have equipment for DNA testing?" I asked. "Yes, we have the equipment, but the final analysis must be confirmed by a certified laboratory," she said. "Why are you asking?" I took out a sample and handed it to her. "I need to find out whose blood this is," I said. "Can you do this?" "Of course," she said. "It will take several hours, and we will need to compare it with all the DNA records we have. Why do you need this?" "I can't explain now, Chief," I said. "I just need to find out whose blood it is, and I ask you to keep this a secret." She looked at me in surprise. "Okay, Lieutenant," she said. "I'll get right to it and send you a message as soon as I have something." "Thank you, Chief. I am in your debt," I said. "But of course," she said with a smile. She was quite attractive, and for a moment I wondered what she would look like without that uniform. But only for a moment. From there, I headed to the bridge to make a report. Alan stood at the hatch to his finished room when I approached the bridge. "Is everything fixed?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said. "Lieutenant Robinson is checking other systems." "Fine. Come into my office," he said. I walked into the finished room to find Alice and Lieutenant Commander Carson, the ship's senior security officer. When Alan entered the small room, he closed the hatch and sat down in his seat. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, looking at Alice and Commander Carson. "I apologize for interrupting your vacation, Alice, but we have a problem here, and I need you and Commander Carson to take care of it immediately." "No problem, sir," she said. "It seems we have a saboteur on board," Alan said. "Two of our weapon systems were sabotaged shortly before arriving at Mars Station, and I was assigned by command to conduct the initial investigation. I have also been ordered to contact the Criminal Investigation Corps on Huygens. They won't be able to send anyone here for at least 36 hours, so you have that time to figure out what you can. I'm temporarily giving you both access to all trackers. I want to know who had access to these weapons assemblies, and I want to know it as soon as possible. I want a thorough but unobtrusive investigation. Is it clear? I don't want the crew to know about this," he said. "We understand, sir," Commander Carson said. Meanwhile, the engineering team from the Mars station is conducting a full diagnostic of the fifth level on the ship. This will delay us for about 72 hours. The command doesn't want to see us traveling with a possible saboteur on board, and I agree with that. It's possible the mission will be canceled, Alan said. Questions or comments? "Only one, sir," I said. All eyes turned to me. "Yes, Lieutenant?" Alan asked. I found what I believed to be blood on the control unit housing that I replaced. I took a sample to the infirmary for DNA testing, I said. Good decision, Alan said. I'll stop by the infirmary. Who did you give the sample to? To Chief Benson, sir, I said. He nodded in recognition. Fine. I'll talk to her when I get there. Thank you. Anything else? We all shook our heads. Scatter. You have a job. Yes, sir, Commander Carson said. We left the ready room, and I locked my toolbox in the weapon console. I was about to leave the bridge when Alice called out to me. Yes, ma'am, I said, turning my attention to her. Bill, I spent some time watching Tubby and Commander Travers. I'm sorry, but it looks like they're too close, if you know what I mean, she said. She took out her cell phone and showed me the photos. I was shocked by what I saw. Tubby and Bull walked hand in hand into the club. Alice took pictures of them dancing and drinking, acting like two teenagers on a date. There was the usual flirting and touching, and Alice had pictures of them kissing. She then showed me pictures of them entering the hotel. It didn't take a scientist to figure out what they would do there. I'm sorry, Bill, she said quietly. I thought you should know. Thank you, Alice, I said, fighting back tears. Are you going to tell the captain this? You know I have no choice but to report, she said, but I thought you should be the first to know. I appreciate it, I said. I left the bridge and caught up with Robinson. We have completed the review of the remaining systems and have taken an inventory of all equipment. My shift ended. I went to the mess hall to get something to eat and then went back to my cabin and tried to sleep. It wasn't easy with the images of Tubby and Bull together, but I managed to get some sleep. I woke up, showered, got dressed, and was getting ready to head out when Tabby walked into the cabin. She looked rested, and her face glowed with the same light that always appeared after sex. Part of me wanted to kill her. Did you have a good time? I asked in a neutral tone. Yes, actually, yes, she said. We just got back. I'm sorry you couldn't join us. Maybe next time. I just looked at her. What's happening? I saw all these engineers from the station. Maintenance, I said. So, what are your plans? Well, I'm going to get some sleep. I'm pretty tired and have the next 12 hours off. Are you going on duty? Yes, I said. Did you solve that little problem? I think yes. Okay, she said. You know I missed you there. Is it true? That's not what I heard, I said. What's that supposed to mean? I heard you and Bull had a good time without me, I said. Is there something you want to tell me? We danced a little, she said. We had a couple of cocktails. But that's all. Nothing else happened? I asked. Of course not, she said, feigning shock. Why do you think so? Nothing, I said. I have to go to work. I headed for the door, but Tabby stopped me. She tried to kiss me, but I turned my head away and she kissed me on the cheek. Bill, you know I love you, she said. What's happening? You tell me, I said. I left the cabin without giving her a chance to answer. Who is this woman? I asked myself. Did she really think she could come to me right after sleeping with another man and expect me to act like nothing happened? Did she really think that I couldn't see her lies? I signed into my workplace and realized that I had not seen the bull. I went about my normal routine and turned to my current diagnostics. About 7 hours into my shift, I realized I hadn't eaten anything, so I signed in for a lunch break and decided to go to my cabin to see Tubby before returning to duty. I planned to talk to her, but when I opened the hatch, I was struck by something that no husband should see. There, on the double bed that Tubby and I shared, she had sex with Bull. I felt the gravity increase and saw that the gravity in the cabin was set to 09G. Both turned to see who was standing in the open hatch. Tabby jumped off Bull as he turned to me, a grin on his face. Close the damn hatch, he growled. What are you, pervert? Do you like watching? What's going on here? I asked. Tabby found something interesting on the floor while Bull was getting dressed. What do you think is going on, Lieutenant? He asked, pulling on his clothes. Didn't they teach you sex education at school? He finished putting on his overalls and walked towards me. Let's go for a walk, Lieutenant. We need to talk. He turned to Tubby. I'll come back and we'll finish this. Conversation later. Tabby looked at me with sadness in her eyes. Sorry, Bill, she said quietly. We'll talk about this later, I said. The bull shook his head. No, don't talk, Lieutenant, he said. Let's go. Follow me. As we turned around, I activated the video recording function on my suit. All of our suits had a built-in camera that could be activated when needed. I had a very bad feeling and wanted our meeting to be recorded. I have to commend you, Lieutenant. It was a great idea to lower the gravity in your cabin, Bull said as we walked down the hallway. But you should know I've been in this business longer than you. It took me a little while to realize what you did. How much time? I asked. You meant to say, what time is it, sir, didn't you, Lieutenant? He asked with a grin. I said nothing, and he continued. Well, I think you have a right to know. It began in the second year of the academy. I was her consultant, you know. She came to me with a problem. I managed to solve it, but it cost her dearly. And since then, everything has gone on as usual. You know, a couple of times she almost left you when you were at the academy. You see, when women taste the bull, they can't let it go. He apparently thought he was very funny because he laughed at his own joke. I felt nothing but rage. I wanted to kill him on the spot, but I didn't want to ruin my career over this piece of crap. So you sleep with her every chance you get, huh? I asked. Of course, Lieutenant, he said. You know, you'd make a great detective. And that's the real reason you changed the bridge schedule, isn't it? I asked. Correct again, Jones, he said. And the reason you sabotaged those weapon systems, I added. Between us, yes, he said. But you see, after the captain told me about the sabotage, I did a little investigation, he added, using air quotes. So what are you going to do now? I asked. Are you going to beat me up or kill me? He laughed at this as we turned the corner and entered the elevator. He pressed the button for deck 3 and waited for the elevator doors to close. Of course not, Lieutenant, he said. You think I'll kill a highly qualified officer just for a piece of ass? At this stage, yes, I said. At this stage, yes, I said. The elevator doors opened and he stepped out, motioning for me to follow him. Well, that's where you're wrong, he said. You see, according to my investigation that I just completed, you caught your wife having sex. Frustrated, you decided to sabotage the weapon systems, hoping to frame her lover. When she told you that she intended to divorce you for his sake, you became depressed and committed suicide. He stopped, and I saw that we were standing in front of the right airlock, which was on the opposite side of the station where we were docked. The inner hatch was open, and I noticed that all the suits in the airlock had been stowed away. I also saw a semi-automatic pistol in his hand, attached to his right wrist. I wondered when he had time to put it on and realized that he must have hidden it in his flight. I thought of everything, didn't I? I asked. Yes, he said with a grin. Don't worry, Lieutenant. After you leave, I will take good care of her. Now, go into the airlock. You'll never get over this, you know, I said. He laughed at this. Yes? Who do you think the command will trust? Some brat who can't even satisfy his wife, or a 20-year space veteran? Now, go into the airlock, he said. I looked around and assessed the situation. Gravity was set to 0 AG. Not ideal, but I figured it should work. Now or never. I jumped as high as possible and pressed myself against the bulkhead with one hand. I kicked him hard twice, hitting him in the face. The force of the blows pushed him into the airlock, where he fell to the floor. When I landed, I quickly went to the control panel and closed and locked the hatch. He shook his head, surprised by what had happened. He looked at me, rage in his eyes. Open the damn hatch, Lieutenant, he shouted. Just one question, Commander, I said. Which? Did Tabitha know what you were planning to do? Of course she did, he said. It was her idea. Now, open the damn hatch. I won't repeat it, he added, raising his gun. He cocked the gun and aimed straight at me. Damn it now, I glanced at the remote before answering. Yes, sir, I hissed, pressing the brightly lit button. His eyes widened when he realized what I had done. The outer hatch hissed and opened. The air from the room was suddenly thrown into outer space. Caught by surprise, he stumbled and was quickly thrust into the harshest surroundings known to man. I watched his body spin through space as it left the ship. I knew he would only last about 15 seconds without the suit. There is no pressure in space, and I knew that the remaining air in his lungs would quickly expand and rupture the lung tissue. He will either freeze to death or suffocate. I pressed the button to activate the connection. "Man overboard, starboard airlock 2, I said. Alarms immediately sounded, and people began to gather at the airlock. I looked up and saw Alan running towards me. Alice was next to him. A few moments later, I saw Tubby. "Commander Travers, sir," I said. I handed him a tiny storage device containing a recording of the last few minutes. He admitted to weapon sabotage and admitted to having an affair with Lieutenant Jones. He also admitted that he planned to kill me and make it look like suicide. That's all. "Bull," Tabby exclaimed, looking into the airlock. By this point, the force of the ejection had already sent his body into an unstable orbit around Mars, and it would take hours to recover, if at all. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "You killed him," she cried. "You damn bastard. You killed him. I hate you. Do you hear me? I hate you." "That's enough, Lieutenant," Alan ordered. He grabbed Tabby by the shoulders and handed her over to the paramedics. "Send her to the infirmary. Get her in order. Then hand her over to safety." He turned to me as the paramedics took her away. "You know the order, Lieutenant," he said sadly. "I have no choice. You have been suspended from all duties pending the outcome of the investigation. I'll look into it." "Yes, sir," I said quietly. "That's enough," Alan commanded. "Get back to work. There's nothing else to do here." He turned to Commander Carson before speaking again. "When she calms down, take her statement. I don't want to see her on the bridge. Call Mars Station and inquire about the recovery of Commander Travers' body." "Yes, sir," Carson said before walking away. Alan then turned to Alice. "It looks like you've just been promoted, Alice," he said. "Until further notice, you will be my first officer. You will need to adjust your bridge assignments. The mission will likely be canceled after this." "I understand, sir," she said. "Commander Carson and I have completed our initial investigation, sir. We would like to discuss our findings with you." "In my finished room, number 1, he said. "Now." "Yes, sir," she said. She turned to me before walking away. "I'm sorry, Bill," she said. "You didn't deserve any of this." "Thank you, Commander," I said, heading towards my quarters. When I got there, I took out all of Tabby's things and put them in her bag. I didn't want her anywhere near me and knew she would probably be assigned to the cabin originally intended for the chief pilot, which was now empty. A couple of hours later, someone from security took her things. I didn't know where they were taken, and I didn't care. I turned the rubber mattress over and replaced the dirty laundry, throwing the old ones into the laundry basket. I knew that until further notice I would be confined to my cabin and my access would be limited to the mess hall and gym. So I sat down at the computer console in my cabin and searched the JAG system for forms until I found the divorce application. I filled out a form requesting a divorce on the grounds of adultery. Since our marriage was registered by the JAG Corps, the divorce will also be registered by them. There was nothing to share, and there were no children. We both had the same salary, so there would be no child support. It was a simple parting where she leaves hers and I leave mine. I asked her to give up my last name and return the rings. After checking all the details, I clicked Submit and waited until I received confirmation that the request had been received by the JAG system. It's amazing how fast the system can sometimes work. Within 24 hours of the incident, I met with not one, but 2 SEAL agents from Huygens. It was clear that they were trying to make me look vindictive. However, the JAG lawyer they brought in to represent me during interrogation did not allow me to make a single statement that could incriminate me. I was on pins and needles for the next 24 hours, not knowing if I would be arrested. I paced nervously around my cabin most of the time. I knew that by this point what Tubby and Bull had done had become common knowledge on the ship, so I deliberately avoided the mess hall at normal meal times to avoid the rest of the crew. I was sitting on my bed when I heard a knock on the hatch. I thought it might be the ship's guards coming to arrest me and prepared for the worst. "Come in," I said. When the hatch opened, I saw Alan and Alice. I stood at attention as they entered the small room. "At ease, Lieutenant," Alan said, sitting down. Alice also sat down. I relaxed and sat back on the bed. "Mars Station has recovered the body of Commander Travers. They also found an illegal weapon that was attached to his hand. We have reviewed all the evidence, and the SEAL report states that you acted in self-defense. Tracker history shows that Commander Travers was at both sabotaged weapon stations shortly before Lieutenant Robinson noticed the calibration error," Alice added. "And the DNA from the blood you found matches the commander's DNA. Combine that with his confessions to you, it becomes clear that he was the one sabotaging these systems," Alan said. "Your wife claims that she knew nothing about the sabotage, but she knew of his intention to kill you." "But Travers told me it was her idea," I said. "Perhaps this is true, perhaps not. Who knows? In any case, she is being held in a punishment cell as an accomplice in Commander Travers's plot to kill you. She may be accused of conspiracy, but that will be decided by the authorities on Earth." "So we're going back to Earth, sir?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes, Bill," he said. "Mission canceled, at least for now. Command is going to investigate when we return." "So does this mean I can go back to work?" I asked. "It took a while, but I convinced Houston that I needed you back on the bridge since we had lost at least 2 officers. Do you think you can handle both positions, operator and gunsmith? Alice says you are ready to handle the operator's duties." "Yes, sir," I said. "Okay," he said. "We take off in 12 hours, so I want you to be rested and ready." "Thank you, sir," I said. "Can I see my wife? I need answers." "Are you sure you want to do this, Bill?" he asked. "Absolutely sure, sir," I told him. He thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, Bill," he finally said. "I will allow it if Commander Brewster comes with you. Do you mind, Alice?" "No, sir," she said. "Okay," he said. "Well, get started, son, and then rest. It's time for you to start earning your salary." "Yes, sir," I said. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. After he left, Alice looked at me. "Ready, Lieutenant?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, ma'am," I said. We got out and headed to the punishment cell located on the lower deck of the ship. "Don't tell anyone I told you this, but Captain Simmons nominated you for an award," she said. "For what?" I asked, surprised. "He says your actions not only saved your life, but the lives of many of your shipmates. If Travers had fired that weapon in the airlock, there is no telling what damage it would have caused to the ship," she said. "Damn," I said. She smiled. "Congratulations," she said. We finally reached the punishment cell and checked in with a security officer on duty. We then walked to a tiny 7 by 6-foot cell where Tabby sat on her bunk in an orange jumpsuit. "What do you need, Lieutenant?" she asked, her voice laced with sarcasm and contempt. "Okay, now I'm Lieutenant to you, not Bill or Lieutenant Jones," I said. "Okay, have it your way, prisoner. I have a few questions, and I'll leave you alone." "Ask your questions, Lieutenant," she said, looking straight ahead, without even sparing me a glance. "How long did you sleep with Travers?" "Since the 2nd year of the academy," she said. "He was my consultant." "I know," I said. "What started this?" "Do you really want to know?" she asked. "Yes, I want to," I said. "Fine. Since you asked, I failed the test. He fixed it for me. I almost lost my purpose, but I didn't lose it. Thanks to him, I was able to retake the test. I owed him, so I slept with him. I liked it and kept doing it." "So you cheated on each other, and then you repaid him by cheating on me. So?" "Yes," she said. "You have no idea how many times you were with me hours after him. And guess what? I loved it. Do you want to know something else?" and you kept sleeping with him every time you worked together. Whenever we could, she said. You know that sex in low gravity is almost impossible, so we did this before we left and after we returned. Did you ever love me, or was it all a lie? I loved you, she said, but I loved sleeping with him, and it was just sex, nothing more. You knew what he was going to do once we got on board, right? Yes, I knew. I knew that he would change shifts so that we could not see each other often. He didn't think you'd find a way to make time to be with me. To be honest, I didn't think so either. But you outsmarted us both. So we decided to wait until we arrived at Mars, she said. And you knew he would sabotage weapons platforms. I knew he was going to do something, but I didn't know what, she said. All I knew was that he was going to make sure you couldn't take shore leave. We didn't think you'd turn this into a federal case. And throwing me out the airlock was just the icing on the cake, right? He told me it was your idea. This is true. Did you really hate me so much that you wanted to kill me? It was his idea, she said. But you agreed to it. You never did or told anyone to stop him, right? No, I didn't, she said quietly. And I'm sorry for that. I didn't think he would actually do it. Well, he tried and failed, and you will go to jail for your role in this. I hope it was all worth it for you. By the way, I filed for divorce. Big difference, she said with a shrug. I shook my head and stood up. I was so proud of you, the way you handled this ship. I loved you with all my heart. But now I wish I had never met you. I can't wait to testify against you at your tribunal. Goodbye, bitch. I turned to leave and heard her calling me. I'm sorry, Bill, she cried. Really, I'm sorry. Without looking back, I raised my middle finger and continued walking. After our return to Earth, Tabby was sent to federal prison, where she was held during the investigation and trial. Several crew members, including myself, Alan, and Alice, were called to testify. We sat for hours and hours, testifying and answering questions from scores of investigators and high-ranking officers. The worst part was the days we spent waiting for anything. The only thing that happened was the approval of my divorce, which came in early April. All that was left was to file the paperwork in state court, which Jag's lawyer promised to do. Finally, on Friday, April 18, we were called into the conference room where we had to find out our fate. Alan, Alice, and I sat in the same row as Tubby was ushered into the room. Like us, she was in uniform, but unlike us, she had chains on her legs and wrists. 2 armed guards in black uniforms accompanied her, ready for action. We all stood as the members of the tribunal entered the hall, their uniforms decorated with orders and gold braid, indicating their rank. The senior member of the tribunal, Admiral Cartwright, opened the meeting. Please sit down, he began. Let me start by saying this is just an investigation, not a trial. Our job is to find out what happened and make recommendations to prevent it from happening again. He then read the tribunal's executive summary, which described the events that occurred during the mission to Mars. He ended with a simple statement. In short, Commander Travers's personal ambitions overrode his duties to his ship, captain, crew, and corps, leading him to break the law, not to mention many established protocols. As a result of his actions, many employees aboard Armstrong were endangered, and the ship was disabled, he said. Then he turned to me. First Lieutenant William Jones, he said. I stood at attention when I heard my name. He looked at me before continuing. Lieutenant Jones, this tribunal has reviewed all the evidence in this case and has concluded that your actions not only saved your life, but possibly the lives of many of your shipmates. In addition, your hard work, initiative, and attention to detail were key in identifying and eliminating deliberate sabotage that could have easily cost many lives, not to mention a $1 trillion spaceship. This tribunal has reviewed your performance record and agrees with Captain Simmons' assessment. As a result, we approved his recommendation that you be awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. Moreover, we believe that your talents will be of great benefit to the Corps in our future endeavors. Expect to receive orders to report to the Advanced Space Operations School for the course beginning June 1st. Congratulations and good luck to you." "Thank you, sir," I said. The Admiral nodded and turned to Alan. "Captain Alan Simmons," he said. Alan stood at attention. "Please understand that this tribunal considers that you did all you could in the circumstances. We understand your desire not to undermine the authority of your senior staff in the eyes of the crew, and frankly, none of us have ever encountered such a situation. However, as the captain and commander of your ship, you are directly responsible for everything that happens on it." "I understand, Admiral," Alan said. "This tribunal agrees that you should continue to command Armstrong, but an entry will be made on your service record. Armstrong is currently undergoing an upgrade, and new crew assignments will be made. We also agree that Lieutenant Commander Brewster would be a good choice for the position of First Officer. This tribunal, therefore, recommended her immediate promotion to the rank of Commander and permanent appointment as First Officer. Expect new mission orders soon," he said. "Thank you, Admiral," Alan said. The Admiral then turned to Tubby. "First Lieutenant Tabitha Abernathy," he said, using her maiden name, which she was supposed to take after her divorce. Tabby stood up as the others before her had done. "It is an understatement to say that this tribunal is extremely disappointed with you. You not only disgraced your ex-husband, but you also disgraced your uniform and the entire Corps as a whole. Your actions in this terrible matter, no pun intended, could very well have endangered the lives of many of your shipmates, including your ex-husband. At risk, as a result of the statements entered into the record by both you and Commander Travers, we have had to review your entire service record, including your academy records. We have been able to confirm that Commander Travers, as your advisor, intervened to help you pass the test you initially failed. If he had not intervened, you most likely would have been eliminated and not received your rank. Of course, your record as a pilot was outstanding, but we can't help but believe that you should never have received your rank in the first place. The sexual quid pro quo you entered into with Commander Travers cost him his life, and almost cost the lives of your ex-husband and a number of others. Your actions can only be described as unworthy of the position you hold. We understand that you are currently facing a court-martial for your actions, but that court has recommended that the personnel office strip you of your rank and demote you to private, E1. They agreed, and your new title and salary are effective immediately. Take her away, he said, addressing the guards. They turned her towards the door and started to lead her out, but she stopped when she got closer to Alan, Alice, and me. "Bill," she began, tears streaming down her face. "Stand still when you speak to me, private," I said sharply. She stood at attention and looked straight ahead, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Let me speak, Lieutenant," she said. "Denied," I barked. "Get this thing out of my sight," I told the guards. They stood at attention. "Yes, sir." They took her hands and led her away as she sobbed. At this point, I really didn't care what she had to say. A copy of the tribunal's findings will be sent to each of you and placed on your permanent file. "The tribunal is adjourned," Admiral Cartwright announced, slamming his gavel. We stood up when the tribunal left the room. Alan turned to me after they left. "Well, it wasn't that bad," he said. "What do you say, let's have a beer? I need to freshen up." "It suits me too, sir," said Alice. "Why not?" I added. We left the building and headed to the officers' club, where we got pretty drunk. 17 months later. Standing at the airlock leading to Galileo Station, an orbital station on the dark side of Mars, I reflected on the past 17 months. Tubby's trial ended a month before I arrived at the Advanced Space Operations School. Of course, I testified for the prosecution, and I did it willingly, although I didn't like remembering what happened to her and Bull on Armstrong. Tabby looked terrible when they brought her in. This time she was wearing a private's uniform, and her flight insignia had been removed. She had lost weight, and her eyes were sad and sunken. She lost everything she loved: her rank, her wings, the man she once called husband, and her lover. She also lost any hope of a career as a pilot. Regardless of the outcome of today, her record was forever tainted, and she would never again fly a spacecraft, civilian or military. The members of the tribunal entered the courtroom, and we all stood until we were ordered to sit down. The judge looked at the jury members and asked if they had reached a verdict. "We have reached a verdict, Your Honor," said the senior member, Colonel. When asked, the colonel said that the jury found Tubby guilty of being an accessory after the attempt to kill me, but not guilty of the conspiracy charge. Apparently, the defense won the argument that this was a word-against-word case, and there was no direct evidence that she was actively conspiring to kill me. However, there was enough evidence that she knew about Travers's plan to throw me out the airlock, but did nothing to stop it. The judge showed no mercy and sentenced her to 10 years of hard labor in federal prison. She was also to be stripped of her rank in disgrace at the end of this 10-year term. The judge thanked the jury and struck his gavel, dismissing the case. Tabby was taken out the same way he was brought in chains. She never looked at me or tried to talk to me. I arrived at my course, which took place in Florida, near Cape Canaveral, and enjoyed the training. I also enjoyed the weather and the scenery, which included a lot of naked female flesh. A year and a half later, we graduated, and I was promoted to the rank of lieutenant commander. I also received an assignment that brought me here to Galileo. This station, unlike Mars, was a closed object that orbited the red planet so that it could not be seen from Earth. I had no idea what was going on here and was very curious. When the door opened, I was greeted by an attractive female captain who took my orders. I introduced myself and shook her hand. "Nice to meet you, Commander Jones," she said. "I am Captain Hawkins. I am familiar with your service on Armstrong and have heard good things about you from Captain Simmons. I also spoke to Alice Brewster." I looked at her without saying anything. She told me what happened, and I'm sorry. That won't happen here, I promise. "So, are you ready to take a look at your home for the next few years?" "Years?" I asked. She smiled and led me to the observation platform. When I joined her, she pressed a button, and the glass in front of us became transparent. My eyes widened when I saw the giant ship in front of me. "She is the largest, fastest, and most advanced in our fleet, Commander. And you will be my operations officer. That makes you my number 2. Are you ready for an adventure?" Her eyes sparkled when she said this. "Absolutely, Captain," I said. "What is our goal?" "If all goes well, Commander, Alpha Centauri." I looked at her, stunned. It's more than 4 light years away. "The plan is to break the light barrier. If everything goes according to plan, we will be there in less than 2 years." "Is it even possible?" I asked. She smiled and nodded. "If the engineers are right, then yes," she said. "Damn," I said. She laughed. "We launch in 15 days, Commander," she said. "You have a lot of homework, so you better get started. I like to do briefings at Zurich every day." "That's right, ma'am," I said. She extended her hand, and I accepted it. "I have some things to sort out, but I'll get back to you." "Welcome aboard, Commander," she said before leaving. After she left, I looked at the ship floating in the giant dock. I looked towards the side of the ship and smiled when I noticed the name, US Enterprise. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.